Hello, and welcome to the SquaMates podcast. This is a very serious podcast about reptiles and amphibians where the language is strong and the jargon is stronger. I'm one of your three co-hosts. I'm Dr. Mark D. Schertz. I'm a herpetologist and an evolutionary biologist, and I'm joined by Ethan Kosak.
Hi, I'm Ethan Kosak. I am a sorry. I am a take that again. Cartoonist and herpetoculturist and general malcontent.
And Gabriel Ughetto.
And I'm Gabriel Ughetto, and I'm a paleo artist and scientific illustrator, and I used to work in herpetology, but not anymore.
Very well-oiled machine this is. Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the podcast. We have some very exciting and interesting things coming up where we talk about tiger salamanders and gymnophthalmids and how to spell them. Yes. But before we go into that, we have a few announcements and updates from the mates, us, the SquaMates. It is a pun, in case you're not aware, from all of our sides. So maybe, Gabriel, can you go first? Do you want to give us an update on the books and whatnot?
Wait, I wasn't ready, but yes. One of the updates that I have is that I've been illustrating this series of books written by Professor Ben Garrett, which many of you might know from his BBC documentaries, and they are a series about extinctions, about the extinctions events that have occurred in our planet. And there are a series of 8 books, and the first 3 just came out a couple of weeks ago in the UK. I don't know exactly when they're going to be released in each country. I think they're going to be released later this year in the United States. But I'm super happy because I've been illustrating them, and it's been a lot of hard work, and they're super cool. The first 3 books are about hallucigenia, which is a Cambrian, very odd worm-like creature. Then is Dunkleosteus, which is the placodont, the famous placodont fish.
The bitey boy.
Yes.
Bitey boy. Yes.
And then the third one is about trilobites. And they're not just about a single species that's just like the main character of the book, but inside the book you can see both examples of modern animals, of extant animals, as well as animals from other periods or other animals from around the period that we're talking about. Each book deals, like, for example, the first one deals with mostly about animals about the Cambrian and Ordovician period, and he talks about the Ordovician extinction. So they're really cool, and I'm very happy about to have been working on them. I'm still working on the later part of the series.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I have to say is that I am doing the things that I can disclose, because there are a lot of things that I cannot say, but I'm working also on some package art for the Tyrannosauroid series of figures from Created Beasts. So I'm doing 3 of the Tyrannosaurs, and that's been fun because it's something that it's something that I've not done before to create package art. So
I have one of their. I have the Velociraptor from their first Kickstarter.
It's super cool. I'm looking forward to getting figures. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting some of the ceratopsians. I really like the ceratopsians.
I didn't get to participate in that one, but they look really cool.
Yeah, they're super cool.
Nice. Cool. How long have you been working on the illustrations for the Garrett books?
Forever. I mean, it's been crazy because all of a sudden, like, we were working for a long time on one of the books, and then the pandemic happened, and all the time schedule went insane. So for the other books, I've had very short time to produce a really large amount of illustrations per book. I have to basically, for one of the books, I actually had to do 27 illustrations in a month and a half, which almost killed me. You guys saw that I was like suffering. It was one of the reasons why. That was why, yeah. it was really intense. I don't think I've ever done something like that. And I'm fast. I'm a fast illustrator, but that was like out of the world. So
Yeah.
But they're super cool. I'm super happy with them. It's nobody's fault that the schedule has been gone like that. It's been last year was a crazy year for everybody.
Yeah.
And that messed up. People in the editorial company that we're working with went on furlough, and there was a lot of issues happening. So it took a while to get everything back together. And when we got it back together, it had to be done immediately. So it's like
Right. Yeah. Cool. Ethan, how are the newts doing?
The newts are well. Mainly, the stuff to talk about would be that my palmate newts are morphing. So I've got lots of them coming up on land. They morph so small; they're like an inch long.
And when did the eggs get laid? Just so that, or when did they get laid and when did they hatch? Just so we have like an idea of the timeline.
They've been laying since my adults hit 2 years old about 6 months ago. They've been laying continuously since then. So I have larvae at like all stages, and they're still laying. And they don't
sync up as like late ones, early ones in the season.
I've got like 4 tanks going of different sizes, but I'm discovering that they don't really eat their larvae. So I have another experiment going where I'm just leaving some in the tank with the adults, and they're getting to morph size. They don't seem to be showing any interest in eating them. I have other newts where that is definitely not the case. And,
so they're not cannibalistic.
No, they don't seem to have any interest in that. So
that's
great.
Good. That can save you a lot of space, I guess.
It could, I guess.
Yeah.
And I might have mentioned this before, where they just started laying, but my Synapse pyrogaster, the Japanese fire-bellied newts I have, I had moved them into a new tank about a month ago, and they started laying for the first time, and now I've got larvae, and they're looking great. So
those used to be one of the most common newts that you would see around.
The Chinese fire-belly were
the Chinese fire-belly.
I have those too, but mine are not. They're not. I haven't gotten those to lay eggs yet. But the Japanese fire-belly are basically the same idea, but a little bit bigger. And
but I mean, like they used to be so common, and now you don't see them anywhere.
No, yeah, I used to be able to buy them at any pet shop for like $5, and now
were those all imports then?
They were by the millions. They were imported. And now I've seen little morphs, little guys going for $50 to $100.
Yeah. Crazy.
And what's crazy is people get all mad because they want the adults. Like you used to be able to buy the adults.
Yeah.
The adults no one's selling adults, and
because of the survival rate, or because
they once they morph, they come up on land and they stay terrestrial for like 3 to 5 years, and then go back in the water. Nobody wants to deal with the terrestrial phase because it's a pain in the ass. You have to feed them fruit flies and stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, I'm on board with it. I'm ready for it, but nobody wants that. They want the adults where you just throw goldfish pellets at them and hope for the best. So
the morphs, you mean?
Once the adults go back in the water, they're a lot easier to feed.
I see. Yeah.
So when they go back to the water, how long do they stay? I mean, they stay just there.
They stay adult. Yeah, I mean, my adults will haul out on a little land area every now and then, but they're primarily aquatic. They're in the water 90% of the time.
Okay. So they
That's
basically also go through an eft phase.
They do.
Yeah.
And their eft phase is really long. What I'm noticing with these guys is the aquatic larval phase seems to be really quick. Like, I've got 2-week-old larvae, and they're already showing little arm buds. So,
I'm imagining that with other amphibians, that's also depending on you cannot
conditions
necessarily you cannot extrapolate what's happening in a terrarium.
Right. Oh, absolutely, and I think that's true with the palmates. I think my palmates are morphing smaller than they would in the wild because my temps are a little warmer than they would be.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 70 degrees in their tank right now, which is warm, and I keep trying to get it down, but they don't seem to care that much. So
Cool.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so that's me.
Nice. We have one more announcement before we work on to the science part of the show, and that is that we are going to be setting up a Patreon in the very near future. If not by the time this episode has aired, then certainly by the time the next episode airs. So watch our social media spaces on Twitter and Instagram and all the other places at SquaMates Pod, and you can follow and support us as we go on this delightful adventure going forward.
Yes,
it would be super great to have Patreon supporters.
The money will every month. The money will go to whichever one of us defeats the others in single combat.
Yeah, that's. That and also whoever is giving out the most money for the show.
And the video of that will be one of the Patreon tiers.
Yeah. Part of the reason, to give you an insight, the listeners an insight behind the show or behind the scenes of where some of the money is going to go, is that we have been receiving on the website a little red flag that says, in future, Apple Podcast is no longer going to support websites that don't have a HTTPS security. So we will need to upgrade our website security and all kinds of other things. So there are costs associated with running the show, and
yes,
it would be super to have people supporting us, and also then maybe also be able to interact with those people a little bit more directly, because that's something that we don't really have going on so much yet.
Yes, and we may have some news on that front even before the Patreon goes live also.
Yeah, exactly. And just so you know, one of the future perks of the Patreon support is that we are now recording all of these episodes with video and editing them with video. And so some Patreon supporters will be able to see our delightful faces while we talk to each other from across the world, which is delightful. So
or alternatively, you can pay to not see it.
Oh, that is... we can do it that way around as well, yeah. Okay, yeah, so keep your eyes out on that, and now shall we talk about some science?
Yeah,
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, so as already mentioned at the top, we are going to be talking mostly about two specific topics this time. The first is about tiger salamanders, specifically the entire genus Ambystoma, basically, right? So the tiger salamander species complex. And this is in the context of a paper that was just published in PNAS, also called PNAS, by, as I've mentioned before, those of us with an infantile sense of humor. By
every time.
Yeah. So the paper is by Catherine M. Everson et al. It was it's fresh off the press. The title is "Geography is More Important Than Life History in the Recent Diversification of the Tiger Salamander Complex."
This is really interesting because we always hear, when we have these discussions about Ambystoma and neoteny and the evolution of neoteny, it's always kind of mentioned that this is a driving force of that.
Right.
Yeah, and interesting to see that may not be the case. So.
Yeah, so a lot of people would assume that by evolving this dramatically different life strategy, right, life history strategy, that you would no longer necessarily be able to mate with those individuals that don't have that life history strategy, right? But as it turns out, the evidence from this paper and apparently from a few previous papers that they draw on indicates that there is substantial gene flow going on among different populations of these ambystomid salamanders. So maybe let's first, for the people who don't know what they look like, what is an ambystomid salamander?
Also called mole salamanders. They're big, chunky, tend to, in their adult terrestrial form, live underground in burrows, and I mean they're really large. They're a lot bigger than I think a lot of people who are familiar with salamanders might think. We're talking upwards of a foot long, and big.
Is Ambystoma tigrinum also so big, the true tiger salamander?
Yeah.
Really? Cool.
The true tiger salamander now is split also. It's not just tigrinum,
yeah.
it's also Mevordium, and there's Mevordium nebulosum, and
Okay.
and the neotenic individuals of those are enormous.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of maybe I can find one. There's one picture that I think was on AmphibiaWeb or one of those where you can see a larval neotenic tiger salamander, and it is twice as big as the largest axolotl I've ever seen.
Cool. So, of course, most people will be familiar with axolotl, and they are, Ambystoma mexicanum, extremely widely used in various different research fields. We have talked about them quite extensively previously on the show because the genome was published and all those things. But they are not the only neotenic ambystomid, and we also know that they can be metamorphosed if you dump the right chemicals into their water. So there is one species, which is Ambystoma dumerili, right?
Yep.
That is an obligate pedomorph. So when you transform it, if you induce the metamorphosis, it actually dies. And so it is the only member of the entire complex that really is a obligate
That's
pedomorphic species.
I think that's the one that is being raised by nuns.
So there is a very active
choke.
there's a very active conservation community of them, like Ethan just mentioned, in situ, I think it is, right, that they have those a group of nuns working with them. But in Europe, there's also a breeding population being raised by various different hobby breeders, essentially. So they banded together in order to
the European breeders are also supposedly the only ones who have true Mexicanum, true unfettered, virginal, not mixed with other tiger salamanders. See, that's the thing. The part of this that doesn't surprise me is that Ambystoma love hybridizing.
Hybridizing, yes. So if you like the biological species concept, you should just maybe skip forward in the podcast by a few minutes, because we're going to be throwing that under the bus.
I mean, they're known for that. Even in the wild, in places where Ambystoma maculatum and Jeffersonia, where they all overlap, they will use each other's genetic information and
willy-nilly. Yeah.
I don't fully every time it's been explained to me, my brain breaks. So I don't fully understand how the unisexual thing works, but it does. And
and there are a lot of species in the mix here as well, right? The genus Ambystoma has, at a glance, I would say 15 to 18 different species level or subspecies level units.
And some of those names are because I think originally some of the neotenic forms were described as separate species.
Oh yeah, I imagine the historical taxonomy of the group is a total mess.
Is a mess, yeah.
Yeah.
There's an Ambystoma taylori, which only lives in one. A lot of these guys only live in one lake.
Yeah.
And taylori is interesting because that lake is salty. This is one of the only known amphibians to live in partially salty water.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Huh. Cool. Now, so what they've done in this study is they've taken an existing genetic data set and really expanded it. So it was originally 93 individuals for 95 nuclear loci, and they expanded it to 347 individuals that crossed most of the United States, as well as intensively surveying within Mexico. So basically, they got, as far as I can tell, all the species. And they were looking at the
quote unquote species.
Yeah, quote unquote, all the quote unquote species, exactly.
Yes.
And looking across the thing, and then they did various different things that you typically do with data of this kind. It's interesting that they've taken a specific nuclear locus-based approach to this rather than using reduced representation sequencing, so like RADseq or whatever. I guess that the strategy here to do that makes a lot of sense because salamanders have, of course, gigantic genomes. And if you try to do RADseq with them, you might suffer from not finding the right SNPs because your genome's so big, you'd have to sequence at very high intensity in order to get the same SNP across the two different individuals. So I understand then maybe a little bit more why they would do it with this other approach. And then they applied various different methods that we typically apply. So there's a method called structure, which basically says to which group can I assign the individuals if I were to try and sort them? How would I sort them best based on the genetic data that I've got? And there already you can see that there are some clusters forming from the genetic data that have nothing to do with the
human construct of species of where they are. Yeah.
Well, it has nothing to do with the neotenic state. It's all about actually where they are. So it's geography that is causing the clustering much more strongly than neoteny, than this retention of juvenile characters into the adult phase, or rather the failure to metamorphose in this case.
Interesting sort of tangential note to that is tiger salamanders are extremely hard to breed in captivity. The adult terrestrial forms, the only people who seem to have a lot of luck with it are those European hobbyists that we mentioned. And the people who have had luck are always breeding neotenic tiger salamanders.
Interesting.
And then raising up, and some of them will be will fully morph. But they tend not to be able to reproduce whatever the conditions are for the terrestrial versions.
Right.
To do it.
Huh. Interesting. Well, I wonder then if it's based on the conditions, if they're just not getting the tank conditions correct for the...
I absolutely think so. And I think, because also I think the people who have had the most luck are doing it in outside enclosures. Not in,
Oh, interesting, yeah. So one thing that they did here in the study is to assign the various different species names that exist into a life history category. So basically, what level of pedomorphosis exists, and divided into 4 stages, from the obligate metamorph, where they must go through metamorphosis, of which there are very few. In fact, there's only one Ambystoma. That's Ambystoma californiense, which it turns out is sister to all the other species. It's a very, very deep genetic lineage.
They're the reason axolotls are illegal in California.
Oh, because there's an endemic Ambystoma?
Yes, and they're afraid that it will interbreed with it. And
funny. Yeah. I wonder if they can interbreed, because
don't know, but
genetically very different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, true. Anyway, it goes from that obligate metamorph all the way to the obligate pedomorph, and you have many different combinations in between. So there are some species where they're almost all pedomorphic, and then some of them are
Andersoni would be one. Yeah,
and all the way. You have various different combinations of those different traits. And then using that information, they were able to also do some modeling approaches to find out what's the relationship between interbreeding between populations and whether or not they are what level of pedomorphosis do they retain, or what level of neoteny do they achieve. I take a little bit of issue with the use of pedomorphosis for this. They're just the terminology of pedomorph versus neotenic and stuff is really complicated because
perennibranchiate.
Perennibranchiate is actually probably nicer because they're somewhat intermediate, but they do retain the gills, the branchiae. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. Anyway, so there are various different lines of evidence that they've presented in this paper. I think it's nicely constructed. I don't know what you thought, Ethan. I'm pretty convinced.
I mean, you're a better judge than I am when it comes to papers, but I thought it was an interesting paper, and I could follow it, so that's, says something.
Well, I certainly thought it was fascinating that we get all of these different perspectives that basically mostly add up to this one trait that we thought was taxonomically important of pedomorphosis versus non-pedomorphosis turns out to have evolved probably repeatedly to different degrees across the different across the clade.
And I think it makes sense also in just thinking more about how, Ambystoma just don't care. And, so it kind of is in line with some of that.
Right.
But it's really interesting to see that historically, something we thought mattered maybe doesn't matter as much. So
yeah. But I mean, on the other hand, I think it's important to keep in mind that they say, okay, geography does matter. But I do think to some extent we can expect that, at least in some cases, geography matters more when you're dealing with really pedomorphic species than it would with metamorphic species. Because any species that has a dispersal phase that doesn't involve water is much better able to overcome obstacles like cliffs and mountains, right? Yes. Otherwise, you have to go down to the downstream lake and swim up the other stream in the other direction, which is very inefficient in terms of getting from point A to point B.
But what's funny is I immediately think of I have had axolotls that I raised in ponds and observed them crawl out of the pond into a different pond. So
cool.
Yes, but also Ambystoma don't care.
Yeah. Really interesting.
I feel like I can offer so little to this conversation because I know
well, we're about
little about.
We're about to go into
Ambystoma.
Gymmies, so you're gonna get your.
So
no,
here's
something.
I
honestly, I know so little about Ambystoma, and I must admit that I find them not particularly super interesting.
No, and they're also dumb as bricks. But on the other hand, they are kind of charming.
Yes. Yeah.
So. But I do think that something that will be of interest to you, Gabriel, is what the authors chose to do in terms of their taxonomic recommendations, because they had some opinions on the taxonomy of the group, with which I think I agree. But those opinions, they, of course, because this is a PNAS paper, they didn't put in the main text, but they instead put it in the supplements. And so you have to go to the supplements in order to figure out which of the species they've recommended to be synonymized. And as it happens, they have recommended for some of the species to be synonymized with one another. Specifically, it would be Flavipiperatum and Amblycephalum should be synonymized, with Amblycephalum having the priority because it's the older name.
Those are obscure. I think those are like really, really one lake type.
Yeah,
critters.
Yeah,
apparently two lakes now.
yeah. Well, 2 lake critters. Yeah,
okay. The range of the species is doubled. Right, and then there are a few different species that they sunk as subspecies.
No, but why?
Well,
did they keep Tigrinum and Mevordium and stuff separate?
Yes, Tigrinum and Villaci at least remain separate, I think. Yeah. Okay. So what's missing for me is an idiot-proof table at the end of the supplementary text somewhere in the document.
This stuff does have a lot of conservation implications.
Huge.
Huge.
Well, exactly. Yeah. But do they actually refer to them as subspecies? Are they like reviving these stupid models of species bullshit?
We can get into a subspecies debate at some point because so yes, generally I think subspecies are terrible. They have historically been badly used, but recently Kevin DeCura has published a paper on subspecies that completely redefines the idea of what a subspecies is, and in my view makes it much more useful. So what Kevin argues...
what's the concept?
His idea is essentially a subspecies is a species. It is a species, but it's within a larger sort of
complex.
It's basically a sublineage within another lineage, because the reimagining of because until now subspecies have been very, very poorly defined, right? It's been like, we think it's a geographical thing. Like that's what Ernst Mayr said for the longest time. He was like,
subspecies is supposed to show is something that's supposed to show
race.
and it's supposed to show clinal variation and a lot of things that are end up
and those things are out.
Taxonomic diversity.
Right. So what Kevin DeKiros argued in his new paper, which came out last year in 2020 in Herpetological Review, was that a subspecies are just incompletely separated lineages within a more inclusive lineage. So basically, they're
like a proto-differentiation.
Yeah, and in many cases, this allows us to have a more. It allows us to have a bit of a more precise terminology for the units that we're looking at.
What are the parameters then? Where do you cut the line again?
Well, this is the thing. The important thing to remember under this reimagining is that the trinomial in the case of the new version of the subspecies. So this, Achistrodon contortrix is the example
it's a water moccasin. It's a water moccasin.
Which that's the example that DeKiros gives. Using the trinomial under this idea doesn't necessarily mean that the two different subspecies that you're dealing with are somehow inferior to another thing, but rather it's saying these things are closely related and are exchanging genes within the general sort of network that is this unit. So I find it a useful thing. This is actually something my colleagues and I are in the process of embracing for.
I guess
some
my reaction
frogs.
to that is that's all well and good, but in the specific case of Ambystoma,
that is not the way that they have dealt with it in this paper.
Might that not be muddying the waters a bit? I mean, they've already been using subspecies names for lots of Ambystoma, and I don't know that it's clarified much.
Yeah, and also these authors did not use DeKiros' new version of what the subspecies is, but are using rather like the historical.
To be fair,
doesn't mean anything.
To be fair, I haven't seen the first paper that is using DeKiros, proposal.
I mean, it's a new thing. It only came out last year. It is coming.
Would you adopt it?
We are adopting it. Yeah. Yeah,
really,
especially because I'm currently working on some fish papers that are an absolute nightmare if you don't have subspecies. Mm-hmm. So there are some cases in cichlids where you basically can't escape it because the levels of variation are so nested within one another that you wind up getting this ridiculously reticulate situation, and you need some way of recognizing that without calling everything.
Have you seen something like this? I mean, he makes a case for, I guess it's Achistrodon contortrix and conanti, right? It's what he's trying to differentiate there. So the Florida cottonmouth.
Laticinctus. Laticinctus is the...
Yeah, because conanti is not supposed as different species. It's accepted as a different species. Yeah. So, I don't know, man. I just have a big... to me, it's this really making everything even more complicated. And
well, the alternative is to not recognize it with the terminology at all, and just
or make it just it's a geographical variation of some.
But in this case, the point is that it's not a geographical variation. The point is that you have these two things that in part occur in syntypy and have some limited degree of gene flow, but they are across most of the genome separated.
But what subspecies? So they might have a narrow zone of but not
entirely isolated species. Basically,
it's a mini species.
I recommend reading the paper. It's an interesting take on the whole concept, and I do think that it makes the term usable. But
why would you want to use it? We're getting away from it finally.
Because it can be helpful.
Jesus. No, it cannot. What's wrong with the... So there are several species that are, morphologically and even genetically variable and diverse. That doesn't mean that you have to separate each one of those variations
No, but the idea here is that you can align this with the unified species concept, which is another one of Kevin DeCuros's suggestions. And you can basically say,
I agree with that one.
Yeah, well, this says during that gray zone of speciation, there is often gene flow. And when you have high levels of gene flow, but several other criteria are being supported, you can start to call those subspecies, because the only difference between a species and a subspecies here is a difference in degree, not a difference in kind. Whereas historically,
my concern
subspecies have been a difference in kind.
Where is he marking the degree in variation? Because we both know for fish it's going to vary, that for reptiles, and within different groups of reptiles it's going to vary.
That's the whole point of these different concepts, is that they can be adjusted to suit the system.
So what is he proposing for, like something like a kistrodon?
It basically says it doesn't matter which one you use, whether you call them subspecies or species. We're both talking about the same thing. It's just that one tells you more informatively which are the units that are interbreeding.
Okay.
Because if you treat them as two separate species, you assume, okay, these things are genetically isolated. Whereas if you treat them as two subspecies, you acknowledge, essentially, under this idea, you acknowledge that there's still gene flow going on.
So, but a lot of different species have areas where they have genetic, that's not new. I mean, humans are a big example of that. So,
of course,
yeah,
I think it's unnecessary.
Is it still, Gabriel? Is it still Gonatodes fuscus?
Yes, it is fucking Gonatodes fuscus. They don't even have a really contact narrow zone or anything.
Oh, okay, all right, just making sure.
So.
I recommend reading the paper anyway. There'll be a link in the show notes, and then people can form their opinions and let us know what you think. Yeah. Anyway, back to Ambystoma. I don't know if there's anything else more that we really need to add, huh? It's a good paper.
We've sorted the biological species concept, and moving on.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it's interesting that the Ambystomids fall generally into three main clades. Each of those main clades is geographically defined. So one of them is the northern Mexico clade, one of them is the central Mexico clade, and the third one is the central U.S. clade. And then sister to all of those, there is Californiensis, Californienza.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they are noticeably different too. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Ambystoma, the turtles of the salamander world for me.
or the cichlids of the
Yeah, it is kind of weird that these comparatively slow evolving animals, I guess you could say, are having patterns that are reminiscent of what we see in a lot of the rapidly evolving fish. Actually, while we're on the topic of salamanders, it's worth mentioning that it was with great sadness that we heard the news of Dave Wake's passing.
Yeah.
That is a huge loss for the community. David Wake was an absolute icon in terms of understanding salamander development and biogeography. A whole ring species thing is really a thing because of a lot of work that Dave put into it. So
can you tell us again what the name for the ring species is in German? It has a name. It has a name. You refer to it as a German name when you talk about it. So how is it that? No. I mean, in general, when you're talking about ring species, you call it by the German. Everybody calls it by the German name. Ring. I forgot the name. Something is a very long German word.
I don't know.
As it is, as they all are.
Is there any other kind? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a term for ring species that is
no.
It's like,
German words.
Oh yeah,
Long
well, it's
German
like
words.
for like fossil-sized Lagerstadt. It's like Lagerstadt, and it's like a. I forgot what the name is.
Maybe it's Rassenkreis.
Yes, that Rassenkreis.
Drink.
Yeah.
Which is essentially just a circle of races, which I don't know if that's better than ring species. Yeah, but yes. So that was really a sad news. I only met Dave once or twice, and I just was delighted by his personality. It was really incredible to talk with him. I met him at the Evolution Congress in Montpellier in 2018, and he was so. We hadn't met before, and yet he was immediately so friendly and charming. And from everything that I've heard about everyone who's worked with him, they really found him to be a fantastic mentor and teacher. And it is really, it was sad news to hear.
Yeah, I've never met him, but I've, as anybody that has ever read anything about salamanders, I've read a lot of his papers, and he did basically monographs on neotropical Bolitoglossa and other salamanders. So you have to be familiar with his work, very familiar with his work if you were working with neotropical salamanders.
Yeah, and also one of his works with Jim Hankin was foundational in the field of understanding miniaturization in amphibians. Their work together on especially the hand bones within salamanders and frogs that are miniaturized was absolutely crucial. So, well, his legacy will certainly continue. But yeah, it was a sad piece of news. On that note, it's also, I wanted to mention several episodes ago that we lost also Phil Bishop, who he was an absolute conservation warrior. He was the organizer, main driving force behind the organization of the World Congress of Herpetology in Dunedin last year, and that came as a real blow to me because he was just such a kind and inspiring person. He put so much energy into the community, and then seemingly
I did actually have interaction with Phil and did some artwork for him, and very good guy.
Yeah, and it came out of the blue that he had a brain tumor. I believe it was a tumor, and the decline was extremely fast and sudden. So that was also very sad news. It's been on top of all the other tough times that we've been having in the as a society as a whole. It's always hard to lose inspirational people.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Okay, on that note, shall we move on to talk about some gymnophthalmids?
Finally, a much anticipated subject. Even Darren Nash has been asking for it.
Okay, from the top.
How do you
spell gymnophthalmidae?
Oh, that's a very long word.
GYMNOPHTHALMIDAE.
Yes.
MOUSE.
But now, Gabriel, I heard you whispered to me before we started recording that there's now another family, and therefore we have a higher rank of gymnophthalminoides. What?
So for a long time, gymnophthalmids, let me start from the beginning. So gymnophthalmids, when they first, we were familiar with this lizard, they were considered a subfamily of teats, right? And everybody that knows teats, those are tegus, and which is why for a long time, they were given the informal name of microteats. So,
which is a stupid name, which is why we started calling them gymmies.
Well, yeah, and because
episode 1 of the podcast.
Yes,
but they are indeed related to teats, and they form a clade called teoids, right, which includes teats and gymnophthalmid. But I think it's a couple of years ago. I don't remember exactly when the other family, they were subdivided. But recently, and I'm going to tell you in a second, in 2016, there was a paper that showed that a separate group, two genera of gymnophthalmids, which are called Alopoglossus and Tychoglossus, were sister either to the rest of the gymnophthalmids or to gymnophthalmids and Teiids. So they were separated in a separate family called Alopoglossidae. And they are 23 species that basically were removed from the other gymnophthalmids. So I think right now they're mostly considered to be the sister group to the remaining gymnophthalmids. They look very similar to many other gymnophthalmids. They are secretive, skink-like lizards. I will talk about them a little bit later. So let me give you guys, because most people are very unfamiliar with gymnophthalmids, and I mean, I would say most people in the United States or most people that don't live in like South America are unfamiliar with gymnophthalmids.
They're not big in the herp trade either. They're not commonly
because and thankfully they're not. Even though there are many species that are that could be, they're beautiful, but I think it's primarily, I'm not sure why. A lot of species are secretive, but they are not particularly uncommon. Several species are not particularly uncommon. So I don't know why, but I'm happy that they're not popular in the pet trade. They are so. Right now, there are about 55 genera and about 270 species, although there are more than that. I expect that to reach 300 in the next 5 to 6 years, easily.
I think one of our, can I just say, one of our Patreon goals needs to be get Gabriel a new chair.
Yes, my squeaky chair. Me and my squeaky chair. So in the next, I would expect them very soon to reach 300 species. So these are large radiation of lizards, and they're mostly distributed in South America. Most of the species in South America, except in the north of South America, most of them are distributed east of the Andes in most of South America, and they're also present in Central America, south of and from southern Mexico south, but that. They are very the diversity in Central America is poor. Most of the diversity of the family is within South America, and there are subgenus Gymnophthalmids, the ones that give the family the name, that also is found in the Lesser Antilles. They have one species in the Lesser Antilles. So. Like I said, it's a very diverse family, and it's also morphologically diverse, even though most people, I don't know if you guys are familiar with any gymnophthalmids. Are you guys familiar with any gymnophthalmids in particular or not?
Just when we've had discussions about them and you've brought up pictures of them and stuff, and they were
we've mentioned a few on the show before, like I think we mentioned Bachia at some point.
Mm-hmm. They were kind of skinky looking.
Yeah. So I was wondering if are there any like uniting traits that all gymnophthalmids have? Like for instance, the plated lizards almost all have a single fold that runs the length of the side, and then you can immediately see, okay, this is a plated lizard. Is there any like trait that unifies the gymnophthalmids?
Not that I can remember. All the species are very, very variable. On squamation and morphology, and they don't have osteoderms, and all species have limbs, but the limbs have been highly reduced in several different clades separately, to the point which some almost have lost them, but they still are present externally, and they all have like a protrusible tongue like Teiids do, or like Ceratids do.
I was going to ask, do they tongue flick like Teiids?
Yeah. They have that as well. I don't think I'm trying to think if there's any.
Apparently, many of them have a transparent lower eyelid, which is somehow significant enough to be mentioned on the Wikipedia page, but otherwise, I don't think
that's significant. Most of
because we know that some of the fossorial ones are have lost eyelids, basically, right?
Well,
So
not that they have lost it, but
Bachia.
not that they. Well, no. There are a few species, including gymnophthalmids, that they don't have. They haven't lost their eyelid. They have a brill like geckos, and they have or like snakes. So they have a transparent scale covering the eye.
Well, I
And
mean, they don't have an eyelid anymore, do they?
they don't have movable eyelids, but that's
Right.
basically
That's
what it is.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. So, but those are very few. There are only a few species in the family that have that. So, I'm going to take you. So there are several subfamilies, right? And I'm going to take you through each of the subfamilies so you get an idea what they are more or less like. So the first subfamily is Gymnophthalmidae, which is the includes the most skink-like of all the gymnophthalmids, and you can see that by if you Google Tretioscincus. Let me write it down for you guys so you can Google it while I talk about them.
Tretioscincus.
Yes. So they
Tretioscincus.
look very.
okay. I was like, wait, that's a frog-eyed gecko, but that's different. That's
Teratoscincus. Very
Yeah.
close. Goodness.
Tretioscincus. So they look extremely skink-like.
Oh,
they
man.
have the similar coloration, and they're the typical representative of this subfamily of Gymnophthalmidae, because this is the subfamily that looks the most skink-like, and they have very either smooth or keeled scales, but they look very shiny, very skink-like. They are difficult to grasp when you have them in your hand. They basically live the same lifestyle that any regular skink in North America will live, which is basically to be, mostly they either are found like they're semi-fossorial. But some species, like from the genus Tertioscincus, can be found also perched on the base of the trees, like some skinks do. And Gymnophthalmus, which is the one that gives the name of the family, are also very okay. So let me take you back to Tertioscincus. Had a very reduced what would be in our hand, our thumb. They have a very reduced clawless thumb.
First finger. Yeah.
Yeah, first finger. And in Gymnophthalmus, that finger is gone completely. So they only have 4 fingers on the man's. And they are they also tend to have reduced limbs, although they are not super reduced, but they're starting to get that snaky shape where they move mostly by undulating their body. They have a very interesting lifestyle, because they basically swim within the leaf litter. They come out for a little bit, they bask, and they swim back. It's similar to what here in the United States you would see ground skinks doing. For all those that are familiar with ground skinks here in the United States, they behave in a similar manner. They have a very complicated taxonomy. They are parthenogenetic species within this genus, and
Cool.
This was one of those cases where people were able to predict around what area a parent species was going to be found before they found it. So between the parthenogenetic clone and one of the parent species, they were able to predict where the other parent species more or less probably will be found, and then they found it.
Cool.
So it's a super interesting family. Subfamily, sorry. Then you have the largest of all subfamilies, which is called Cercosaurinae. And this is the most diverse and the one that has like all kinds of different taxa within it. Maybe I should leave this one to the end, because that's the most complicated to talk about. Yeah, let's talk first about Rheolaminae, which is a very recently erected subfamily of gymnophthalmids. They are endemic to the Guyana highlands, shields to the tepui, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with the tepuis, but that's a. Are you familiar with the novel The Lost World?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this
wait. You mean the Arthur Conan Doyle one or the Christ one?
The Arthur Conan Doyle one. He was inspired in this region of southern Venezuela and
Table Mountains.
Guyana. Yeah, the tepui are table mountains that basically each tepui has an isolated fauna or mostly isolated fauna on its top. So each mountaintop acts to some degree as an island, and a lot of these genus. This subfamily, which is called Rheolaminae, and the genus is Rheolama, is endemic to those tepuis. They also look a little bit skink-like, but I don't know if you see. I don't know what you guys would think about them. I don't know if there are many photos of them online even.
Yeah.
Let's see, Rheolama.
Rheolama. R-I-O-L-A.
I don't know if you would call that skink-like. Were you able to find it or not?
I found one or two pictures.
I guess there's some sort of skink-like.
Yeah, they look a little bit like very small
Let's see.
Zonosaurus. So there are a few species of garasaurid lizards, so the plated lizards, that look quite similar. They also have those regimented dorsal scale rows.
Yeah, which is something that you will find in many gymnophthalmids. Those sort of
also in
large...
some of the alligator lizards, right? So there's some overlap.
This is what I was telling you, that's why probably in South America,
right?
Skinks have had a difficult time because gymnophthalmids are taking a lot of this small lizard, niche, which they tend to use.
Really interesting. It would be cool to see how the diversification dynamics of these different groups happen in different systems. So as we had Hiral talking about on the last episode, with the various different lizard groups that are already existing in South Africa, whether or not that sort of constrained the ability of skinks to differentiate there, which came first and how were the niches then occupied in what order would be fascinating.
And if you see in the Google search, I'm sure that you got I think for me it's like the fourth picture in the row. You can see that the typical tepui environment in which they live is very cold because these are high mountaintops. It's mostly there. A lot of time it's misty. It's and they live within. It's a barren in certain places. It almost looks. Almost somewhat extraterrestrial in the way that the landscape looks like.
So if anybody has seen Up,
exactly.
the landscape that they went to in the house when they landed the house and where they met Kevin the bird is actually also supposed to be on top of a tepui, as far as I understand, right?
Yeah.
And so that is kind of the landscape that we're talking about. That very weird rocky.
Because the whole thing is that they were saying that they were, these things were, so they are super ancient. Those tabletops are super, super ancient in, not so much in the fauna, but in the geologically. So they were always saying that you could find like lost, that's why the Lost World was called.
Lost World, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. 4 fingers up front, 5 fingers in the back. That says salamander to me.
Well, this one, that's only for gymnophthalmids, though. Gymnophthalmids. The Rheolama, all fingers are present, I think. Okay. But they have a clawless finger in one of them too. Now that I remember. Okay. So then
it's a crocodilian then.
Well, we're about to get into some that look very crocodile-like.
Yeah.
So now we're going to talk about the other subfamily, which is called. So the next 3 subfamilies sometimes are for some researchers, they are grouped into one subfamily. For other researchers, they are grouped into 3 different subfamilies. For sake of clarity, I'm going to keep them as 3 different subfamilies so I can talk about each group different. Yes, I am. In this case, I prefer to do that. So one of them is the famous Bachinae, which includes one genus. I think it's only one genus, Bachia. Which is very famous. And if you guys... I don't know if Ethan has ever seen a Bachia. It's Bachia.
Okay.
Yeah, so
That is interesting.
yeah, they have all the species have reduced their limbs. But the interesting thing is that according to one paper, and I don't know if that is considered still as
It almost looks like a worm lizard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're,
I can't. You know what I'm talking about, though. I can't think of the name.
I also
for
can't
people
think of
that
the name right now.
for people that are here in the United States and that are familiar with Florida lizards, think about something like the sand skink. Something like a sand skink would be similar to this. Sand skinks in Florida, which live only in the central part of the ridge in central Florida, they swim in the sand. They kind of look like that. But Bachia does not live anywhere near the sand. They live in the leaf litter of the forests. All the species are forest species. They have a very complicated taxonomy, like all the other gymnophthalmids. They are very conservative coloration-wise, but the lepidosis or the scale morphology, it's very helpful, and also the number of digits. It used to for a long time their taxonomy was complicated, and people used to think that a species could have several. Some specimens can have 2 fingers, some specimens can have 3 toes, and now we're finding out the more and more is that those are actual species differences, and that there are several species complexes in which some species can have 3 toes, some others can have 1 toe, some others can have. It's not.
Do they have hind limbs?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
And some of them are very small, so that's why you might not be able to see.
Yeah,
them.
I mean, like they look like really reduced, huh?
Yeah, they're very reduced, and they move for all intents and purposes as snakes. They're not common, but they're partly because they are so secretive. Their eyes are also very small. If you can see, they don't have big eyes, and they are mostly leaf litter inhabitants. You barely see them out. You have to basically look for them to find them. It's not
so they're semi-fossorial. They're not fully.
They're largely fossorial. I think more than semi. They come out, but you don't see them that often outside. You have to look for them. Every time that I found a Bachia, it's always been because I've been looking on the tree trunks or.
Yeah, we need a better term for. I guess the term littoral exists. Where things that really live in the leaf litter would be. Because this is true of so many different groups, right? There are skinks that only live in the leaf litter but don't actually go into the soil itself. And there are frogs that also live within that sort of, I guess, mesocosm, or that interstitial space between the top of the leaf litter and the actual soil. Yeah. That we don't really have a term that is consistently used for that. So which is
surprising because so many reptiles and
amphibians live in that zone, and if we keep falsifying it as saying this is either fossorial or terrestrial, then you're belying the actual variation and the natural range that exists between those two different niches, right?
Yeah. So this is a super interesting group. Many new species are being described every year. And for me, they're one of the most interesting groups because there seems to be the case that so in evolution it's easy to reduce or lose some part of your anatomy, but it's not easy to gain it back. And it seems like some Bachia, according to some phylogeny, have
Dolo's law.
Yeah. Have regained digit numbers or increased the size of their limbs, which is not that commonly seen. According to some phylogeny, although there has been some, conflicting
debate.
Debate about that.
Yeah. And it's also very, very common for these things to be reduced repeatedly, and much more often reduced repeatedly than they would be regained. But
yes.
In many cases, again, talking about the work of Dave Wake and Jim Hankin, we know that simply by making the limb bud larger, you would get the full digits, basically. But by having a certain reduced number of cells, essentially, you would still have the genetic programming to do it, but not the developmental mechanisms to do it. So potentially by making the limb bud larger again, you could recover the full limbs. It's not the same thing as losing a limb altogether and then getting the whole limb again. It's surprisingly complicated, just what limitations apply. And Dollo's law is very intensively debated for all kinds of different traits, because also parthenogenesis, not parthenogenesis, viviparity and oviparity does not follow Dollo's law at all, because each of the two different states can swap between the two. It's more like losing a very complex system, like losing an eyeball and regaining an eyeball. Very different.
We've talked about that before. I think there was a skink paper or something where they studied that.
Very probably.
Yeah.
So for one more thing I would say about Bachia is that they have this threatening display when they feel threatened. That is similar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what amphisbaenids do when you're about to touch, which they start like flipping around, like coiling.
That's the critter I was trying to think of the name for. Yeah.
Amphisbaenids.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
they
funny
have a
that
similar.
They do the same. They look like them and they do the same display.
Yeah, they have a similar display when you touch them. They're not as aggressive as amphisbaenids, because some amphisbaenids can bite really hard. But the Bachias they do that sometimes. When you try to touch them, they start like coiling and jumping and doing all kind of jerky movements.
Which also is something that Atractaspis does, from harking back to last month's episode. Is it Atractaspis? The stiletto snakes?
Yeah.
They also have that coil-uncoil reaction, which of course they use to bite, but
exactly. The only difference is the Bachia is not going to kill you.
Yeah. Don't fuck around with something you can't identify.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, we're moving into another subfamily, which is the Ecpleopodinae. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Ecpleopodinae.
Yeah, and this one you can see there's a very common genus here that everybody that works in the Amazon has seen at some point or another. It's called Leposoma, and this is probably the prototypical gymnophthalmids. That's like what the typical tiny leaf litter gymnophthalmid looks like. And this is a very interesting group, because until very recently, these animals were all housed in a genus, and now they're like three separate genera, and they are not particularly closely related, even though they look similar. They have very interesting squamation too. Some of their scales are hexagonal, and on dorsal scales are hexagonal, and they have this lateral ocelli, which are interesting also. Coloration. Some of the species here that I'm seeing on my Google return are not the prettiest one. There are some that are very pretty and colorful. But I'm thinking of some of the Colombian and Venezuelan species, which are not the first one that appear. The ones that you're seeing here are the
almost. I'm looking at Leposoma cynopolex, I think, and it almost looks like a little like a night lizard. Or
true.
Yeah. They're very secretive. Actually, some species are considered to be crepuscular too. I forgot to say that. Some of them are.
So night lizards are Xanthusidae, right? That's the
yeah.
For those of us who don't know the common names.
Sorry, but yeah, they have that sort of interesting like.
But if you
they really do. I totally agree. If I looked at one and I didn't have a sense of scale, I would also guess that this is a Xanthusid that I'm looking at.
They're tiny, but if you notice, if you can zoom on one of the pictures and see the scales on their body, they're super.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah, crazy.
They're super interesting, and they live like all the others. So I think I've heard one book referring to them as many gymnophthalmids as shade lizards. That I think is an appropriate term, because a lot of species live in the undergrowth or the leaf litter of the forest, where there's very little sunlight that reaches that area. So they live mostly in the shade.
I'm seeing what reference to spectacled tegus,
Yeah,
which sounds like a terrible name.
Well, they're called spectacled because of that transparent lower eyelid, apparently.
But that's only for gymnophthalmids, yeah.
The ophthalmid in gymnophthalmid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what gymnophthalmids does. And then we get to the biggest of all subfamilies, which is Cercosauridae. This is the most diverse. I'm going to do a quick search to see exactly how many species.
I would point out to people that they should check the reptile database for the species list for these lizards. The Wikipedia page is very out of date, in part also because taxonomy is just progressing on these lizards very intensively.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things you simply can't rely on.
Like I said, there are 55 genera in the family, and at least I want to say at least 10 of those have been named since 2015. 10 of those genera. So this is very, very, fastly evolving. Okay, so I told you that there are about 270 species of gymnophthalmids, but about, I would say, roughly 230 of the, probably 200 or 200 or 200, around 200 or close to 200 of those species are in Cercosauridae. And the reptile database says that there are 221, but they're including all the other species of the other subfamilies that I'm separating from that subfamily. So
yeah. That's the trouble with searching through the reptile database. Sometimes, if it has at any point been in a certain group, it is often found in the results, which can be very annoying if you want to sort things out. Yeah.
So in this subfamily, you have arboreal species, semi-aquatic species, terrestrial fast runners. You have all the variety of the family is in this subfamily. So I'm going to talk about some genera that are particularly interesting because. One thing that I mentioned is that remember how we talked about how water skinks have their. I told you that water skinks have their counterparts in South America with the gymnophthalmids. Mm-hmm. So it's in this subfamily that you find them. And not only that, but I was just reading a paper of a new genera that was named this year. Let me go check it for a minute. It's a new genera which is called Cataphractosaurus ungerhamiltoni, which is a very long name. And it's a new species from Venezuela. A new genera, a new species from southern Venezuela. And it's one of these semi-aquatic species.
Cool.
And in the paper, in the phylogeny, it demonstrates that there has been separate within the subfamily, Cercosauridae, there have been separate evolution of this crocodile-like appearance for semi-aquatic species in at least, I would say, for what I can count here, around 5 times separately within the subfamily. So this is a morphology that has evolved several times. I'm going to send you a link to the research, to this photo, which has several of the semi-aquatic lineages within the subfamily. This is very interesting for the people that are listening to us while I wait to send you this on the chat. So you can see
there will be a link in the show notes.
Yeah, you can see a link there to the different. These are all the several of the genera that have taken this morphology, this crocodile morphology.
C there looks like remarkably like a red-eyed crocodile skink.
Yep, that's a genus called Echinosaura, and this new species was thought to be part of this genus, but it's not even closely related.
And F, like the face looks like it, but not the body.
Yep, that's Nusticurus. Nusticurus is another species from the Guianan Shield in Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana. They live in this region where there are a lot of small streams, and they behave pretty much like any typical semi-aquatic lizard you would think. They bask on the rocks around rivers, and when they feel threatened, they quickly jump into the water. And they live at mostly They live in all these clear water rivers for for the most part. Nusticorus.
Eating invertebrates and stuff.
Yeah, Nusticorus is also one of the largest gymnophthalmids. They can get it to about 12 centimeters now to length. That's pretty much as large as gymnophthalmids get.
Now it's interesting that some of our gymmy species that we've seen, several of them, have had those ocelli on just above the insertion of the forelimb in exactly the same spot as the geckos have them, right? In the same habitats, right? They
actually have them. Oh, that's a very common pattern in lizards, actually. In
South America.
Yeah.
But outside of South America, it's not common at all. I can't think of any. Maybe there's one Lygodactylus that has that. But in Madagascar, nothing.
I'm trying to think if in Africa, I think some of the cordylids have that too.
Do they?
I think so.
It's interesting.
Of
course, the Gonatodes come to mind, and also Spherodactylus. But I don't know how many other groups of lizards actually have that.
It's super common in South America in many groups. And it may have to do something with the fact that forests, those are reflective spots and they catch sunlight and they're very bright sometimes.
Yeah.
And they serve as a signaling. Males have them particularly noticeable. So these are super interesting because they also have they have all these keels and tubercles with keels on their dorsal surface like a crocodile, basically. And their tails are also, in some of the groups, are laterally flattened to help them swim. So it's really interesting that lizards, and not only gymnophthalmids, but lizards have done this morphology repeatedly.
The crocodile trick.
The crocodile trick. To the point of also developing these large scales, which in other groups have osteoderms, but as I said, gymnophthalmids do not have osteoderms.
I kind of wonder why though. Like, what's the? It's not hydrodynamic to be spiky. So what is the reason for that?
I'm not sure, but something is happening because you have teats like Crocodilurus or Dracena, which also are semi-aquatic and they have the same. More.
I could almost see with Dracena is large enough that, and it's called a caiman lizard, that you could almost mistake it for a small caiman.
Oh, for sure.
That it's doing something in terms of mimicking another animal, but I don't know. It's just bizarre that.
It's actually really interesting that you mentioned that because there are several aquatic snakes as well that also have very rough scales.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about even of course the earless monitors,
the Borneo,
what are they called?
Lanthanotus.
Lanthanotus, yes.
Yeah.
Lanthanotus have also this very weird horny skin. You have the dragon snakes as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to point out that mosasaurs have very tiny scales, but they were all sharply killed tiny scales. So sort of shark-like. There must be something doing there. It's like, how sharks have those scales that apparently make them more, the water, make them more.
Yeah, I say they're not hydrodynamic, but maybe they are. Maybe they are.
I think that's what it is. There's obviously...
It might be that you reduce the resistance from... You cut through the water, essentially.
That's possible.
But I don't know. None of these things are moving particularly fast in the water either.
Well, They are fast swimmers.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Unlike the other, these are very active. Some of them are heliothermic. This group, some of them are heliothermic. They live in open spaces and they are quick moving species.
Crocodile skink's not particularly fast, though. So, and Dracena's not really that hugely. It's not a super.
I would not call Dracena as much a slow lizard by any means. And then you also have Crocodilurus, which is the other large teat that is also that one. That is also semi-aquatic and large.
I guess we were just thinking it's not necessarily speed is all over the place in terms of all the animals that look like that. So I don't know. It's just interesting that nature seems to be converging on something there, and it's not clear.
Yeah.
It's not clear why.
Yeah. So actually, while we're talking about semi-aquatic animals, I wanted to bring up a paper that just, I think on the 12th of May was published in Current Biology. The title is Repeated Evolution of... Wait. The website's like freaking out on me. Repeated Evolution of... of underwater rebreathing in diving anolis lizards. So this is a follow-up on the paper that we had mentioned, on the observations that we had mentioned by Lindsay's work and other colleagues of this weird diving bell habit in anoles that are retreating into the water.
This is super interesting because I think, tying it back to the gymnophthalmids, I think that's something that should be studied in groups like Echinosaura, like Nusticorus, all these semi-aquatic groups that nobody does. I mean, we only found out about those.
That research. Yeah.
No, and a lot of them live in very difficult to areas that are difficult to access because.
What if the spiky skin has something to do with rebreathing potential?
Yeah, that could be.
That's exactly why I wanted to bring it in.
Yeah,
because there is definitely potential that you could be essentially forming a large bubble over your body.
Now that's interesting. I didn't even think of that. That's
And I have a feeling that something like that could be happening also in mop-headed lizards, which are called mop-headed because they are thought that all the channels of they are semi-aquatic Amazonian lizards, but they're supposed that they receive water from when it rains. One of the hypotheses somebody proposed, which I think is bullshit, but somebody proposed at some point is that the keels on the scales allow for all the water that it collects when it's raining or something to reach its mouth, which is bullshit because the animal is semi-aquatic. So
that's Moloch?
Moloch,
Moloch.
Yeah, but Moloch lives in a freaking desert. This is an Amazonian.
Yes, where it makes sense.
It's an Amazonian semi-aquatic lizard. So, no,
that doesn't make sense.
But it could have something to do with what the anolis is doing because Uranoscodon, which is the mop-headed lizard, dives very well, and it also it's another lizard that doesn't.
Mop-headed lizard's a New World lizard.
Yep, you can see the link.
I see it. Yeah, okay. Because it looks a lot like the Thai forest lizard.
One of those agametes.
Yeah, I was just looking at one because someone had it turned out to be something else that was related, but I was trying to help ID something.
One of those goniophilis.
Yeah.
Or Collodes.
Collodes, yeah, Collodes. It was one of the Collodes. Like the female Collode looks a lot like that. Weird.
Well, the quick insert about Uranoscodon.
Yeah, we're getting off lizard
is that Uranoscodon, the mop-headed lizard, can also walk across the water like basilisks.
So it has the fringe. The fringe.
Yeah, it does. It does, and that's not as uncommon as people might think. There is a teat that can do that also. But we'll leave that for
that can do it too.
Yeah, we'll leave that for another episode. Okay, so and so in this group there are also some really cool, perhaps my favorite gymnophthalmids, arboreal species in the genus Anadia, which is Anadia.
A duck lizard? Wait.
No.
Oh, that's Anatidae. Okay.
No, this is Anadia, which I think is a name. It's a female name. And actually, there's a city in Portugal. If you do the Google research, that's what's gonna come up. But if you do, let me see. If you put, like, for example,
Anadia rhombifera
or Ocellata, is a good exact example. So this is a genus that is it's not super well represented molecularly. So there's still a lot of surprises to come from it. I don't think it's monotypic because there are several species that look very different one from another.
Oh, this one's pretty skinky looking.
Well, I would say more than skinky, it's very anguid-like. It looks a lot like
a lacertid.
It looks
the lacertids with extremely long tails.
Well,
I was looking at Anadia Peter's eye, which immediately made me think of a like a sandfish or a banded Peter's banded skink or something.
Oh yeah, true.
But some of the large species look a lot like Abronia.
Yeah,
I could see
Peter's
that.
eye also looks like a stretched Abronia.
But let me. So, for example, like let me see.
Marmorata looks pretty.
Marmorata is one that is like a Marmorata, and so a lot of these species are arboreal. There's some of them are seldom seen, even though they're not uncommon because they live high in the canopy, and I'm talking about 30 meters in the canopy. They live in bromeliads, around bromeliads. So in neotropics, in neotropical forests, there are two levels of leaf litter. There's the leaf litter that accumulates on the floor, and then there's this leaf litter that accumulates in the branches of the trees. A lot of gymnophthalmids also use this leaf litter in the branches.
You know, one of the search results that comes up is you on Twitter. Also, it says if you like Abronia, look at this.
It's true because they look one of the cool things is that I have a friend that was keeping an Abronia marmorata, a group of Abronia marmorata, and this is the coolest thing. This has never been documented or anything, and I do not think I've ever heard of this in any old lizard. But in the tank, the Abronia would, you know how bromeliads keep water in the center?
Yeah.
So it would go like a frog, and it would go in the water in the center and sleep there. Within the water in the center of the bromeliad.
Smart.
But I don't think I've ever heard of that behavior in any lizard.
So these are they're pretty small.
No, well, Abronia marmorata is another large. You can get Anadia marmorata is another large gymnophthalmid. You can go to our Abronia size.
So it must have been a large bromeliad then.
Yeah. It was
okay.
He had this big tank because it was the first time that we actually had the opportunity to keep some alive because they're not uncommon, but they're seldom seen. They never come down from the canopy, and it's rare that you find them. So they have this pair, and one of them was sleeping there. And to me, that seems like something worth. It's another one of those things that we know so little of this family, and they are like full of surprises. They have very large rectangular scales. A lot of the species in Anadia also live high in the paramos. You will find also in this group of lizards, in this subfamily of gymnophthalmids, there are a lot of species that live high in the paramos, so high in the Andes. They live where there's no trees. A lot of the species live in frailejons, which are these large, almost primitive-looking plants. So they look similar to some of those plants that you see in the mountains of Africa that have like I don't know how you would call them. If you're familiar with that, this is the name of the plants. They are large plants. Frailejon, they're called, and they live. They occur in the Andes. So they
look like stacked aloes.
Yes, and they as the plant grows, it accumulates dead leaves on its trunk.
Yeah.
A lot of these lizards live, and a lot of frogs and a lot of animals high in the Andes. Like I'm talking about 4,000 meters, 5,000 meters above the sea level. No, 5,000 too much. 4,000 meters above the sea level. They live right under those leaves to protect themselves from the environment, which is pretty harsh at those altitudes.
They do look pretty prehistoric, almost like cycads or something.
They're weird.
Yeah.
So inside, when you're in the Andes and you look there, that's where everything lives, right? So that you find anarias, for example, a big example. You find frogs, like there are a lot of pristimantis that live there. And so in this group, you find a lot of those high Andean species that look like that, and arboreal, the semi-aquatic ones. And let me see if I'm missing. There are some species in the genus Cercosaura. So Cerco Sora, that are almost whiptail-like in behavior, and they are like fast-running, long-tailed. Several of them are striped with the ocelli that we discussed. They also tend to have those ocelli, and they live they behave more like a mixture between a skink and a whiptail lizard.
Bright orange tail on this one.
Yep, they often have very long tails, and the tail tend to be colorful because, as many lizards do, it's a way to get at the attention away from your important body parts that you cannot regrow. And that's pretty much it. That's a good very superficial look at gymnophthalmids, but as you can see, it's a very diverse, poorly understood group that most people that are outside neotropics or do not work with neotropical herpetofauna is not really super familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating group, especially from my perspective as a person who focuses entirely on old world animals. It's super interesting, all the groups that are only found in the new world, as it were, and gymmies are prominent among them, but we always take them for granted or ignore them because, I don't know, they're just not, none of the species that we saw were spectacularly beautiful in the sense that, like, Abronia is a spectacularly beautiful lizard. So I see how they sort of slip under the radar for a lot of people, but they're really cool. I mean, that they have covered such a broad range of niches, all within the sort of long lizard shape. It's really cool.
I kind of wrote them off mentally as just sort of skinky looking little lizards,
skinky boys,
and but they're not. They're kind of occupying like a lot of niche, more than that, and like you've got some doing anole or gecko impressions almost, and
I would disagree that they're very. I think that some of the species are really beautiful. I think they're not like. I think they're not like. Flashy like an agama could be, or
sure.
Well,
that's what I mean.
I would come to your defense, but you called Ambystoma boring at the beginning of this. So you're dead to me.
It's true. No, but for me, I mean, I really like their big scales and their colors, and they have this bright ocelli, and their habits are very poorly understood. We basically are just scratching what we know about them. So for me, they're a blank canvas of all the things that we can.
Well, and it may have saved them a little bit because they're being unremarkable in a little bit. Like I said at the beginning, they're not something that's commonly seen in the pet trade, and that may be good for them. So undoubtedly is good for them. So
it's really interesting to me that they have those. Most species have very large scales, whereas you said they are relatively closely related to the teiids, right? And the teiids typically have very small granular scales, right?
Well,
many of them have tiny granular scales.
Well, but their ventral surfaces and their tails are covered by very large plates.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, interesting. Because I mean, on some of the pictures, like we were discussing, some of them are just so incredibly similar to the crocodile lizards that I would have just sort of naturally assumed that they're somehow related to each other. Alligator lizards. Yeah.
To me, they're covering also a lot of, like, South America doesn't have a lot of languids either. We have languids, but not that many, and they are covering a lot of that niche, I would think. There's another one. They can have like really interesting patterns, and a lot of them look a lot like what you will see gallywasp look like.
Yeah, true. Yeah, really true. Fantastic. Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed our brief foray into the gymmies. If there are any other taxa that you'd like to hear us talk about and give strong opinions on, whether they're founded or not, do let us know.
And I would advise listeners to really listen to the show notes or search the show notes while they're listening to this episode, because it will help them, see a visual reference. I'm going to try to find stuff to put in the show notes to show even
just having the genuses, the taxa names available to Google.
The ones that we mentioned will be useful. Yeah.
And I'm going to put some of my own drawings of
nice.
So that's for people to see.
You do seem to show you are an evangelist for the gymmies. So like I said, you showed up in the Google results.
Funny enough, I never worked with them. I was about to work with them, and I never really got to work with them completely.
Yeah.
But not anymore. Thank you all so much for listening. As we mentioned earlier in the show, do please do follow our social media spaces and check out for our upcoming Patreon, where you'll also be able to get some fun things related to these kinds of show notes. But until then, Ethan, where can one find you on the internet?
I am at Black Mud Puppy nearly everywhere.
And Gabriel?
I'm at Serpent Illus on Twitter and on Instagram, and on Facebook I am as Gabriel Ugueto Art.
Fantastic. You can find me at Mark Scherz, MarkScherz, on most of the places, all the places that really matter. Facebook doesn't really matter. At MD Scherz if you do want to find me there. You can follow the show on all of the social media platforms except for TikTok, because we're not that young. And at SquaMates Pod is where you want to find us. On Twitter at SquaMates Pod, on Instagram at SquaMates Pod, on Facebook at SquaMates Pod. You can send us an email, squamatespod@gmail.com, if you have also hot takes. You can also leave us a comment on our website, squamatespod.com, where you can also find the extensive show notes, which include references for everything we mentioned on the show, as well as, in this case, probably beautiful art from Gabriel and photographs of some other species and all kinds of really cool things. And until next time,
Hakuna Squamata!